I see that.
Good morning, everyone. I will call the meeting of the City Fire Prevention and Building Code Council.
Exactly.
Welcome
Yep, not a problem.
to our Albany location
Back here.
and our two locations in New York and Buffalo. Before we begin the meeting, I would like to introduce a new member of the council. We have a new member representing cities with a population of over 100,000. Michael Sabatino is a member of the city council from the city of Yonkers. Michael, welcome to the council.
Thank you.
Okay, with that,
Got the thank you. I got that thank you.
Ron Easter representing Secretary of State Cesar Perales.
Here.
Michael Weber representing Commissioner Darrell Towns. Vince Rapatello representing Commissioner Mario Bozzolino. Keith Wen representing the Honorable Bill de Blasio.
Here.
The Honorable Michael Sabatino.
Here.
Michael Batter representing the Honorable Judith Kennedy.
Here.
The Honorable Barbara Rice. The Honorable Ted Banta.
Here.
The Honorable Bill Tucker.
Here.
Sean Hamlin. Tim DeRuscher.
Here.
John Flanagan.
Here.
Bill Tyne.
Here.
And John Torpy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, minutes from the August 19th, 2015 meeting of the Code Council. You have the draft minutes as part of your agenda package. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Mr. DeRuscher?
This is a matter of question. Give my second. This is a matter of my.
No.
Oh.
It's a matter of the second meeting I've attended. Most meeting minutes that I see on meetings. For the votes, typically I have seen unanimous without any questions or dissents. Is there any reason specifically why the meeting minutes do not reflect specific votes rather than 6 ayes, 7 noes, or vice versa? And if not, is there any reason why we could not have a roll call vote recorded in the meeting as we did at the meeting?
My understanding is that the minutes need to record the disposition of votes taken. If there is interest in knowing or learning of the actual votes that were taken afterward, that certainly is available by reviewing the transcript. So this has been our protocol up to this point.
So it is available?
It is available.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve by Mr. Flanagan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Torpy. Discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Aye. Motion is carried. Thank you. Agenda item number 3, code change adoption, carbon monoxide detection in restaurants and commercial buildings. Mark, would you introduce the agenda item, please?
Yes, as Ron said, this pertains to the amendment to the Uniform Code that adds additional provisions relating to carbon monoxide in restaurants and commercial buildings. Code Council first adopted carbon monoxide detection as an emergency rule and as a notice of proposed rulemaking at its meeting in May. At the subsequent meeting in August, the Code Council readopted the emergency rule, and at this time it's due to expire on or about November 19th. During that time, the public comment period began and ended. Staff has reviewed the public comments, we've assessed the public comments, and we've submitted those public comments to the members of the Code Council, as well as the assessment of public comments. And staff has made recommendations to the Code Council on some minor changes to the rule text. And these have been submitted to the Code Council last week. So at this time, we were asking the Code Council to adopt carbon monoxide detection for commercial buildings and restaurants as a permanent rule. And we are also asking the Code Council to readopt this emergency rule so that they can continue carbon monoxide requirements during the time it takes for the permanent rule to be properly filed in the state register. I'm going to go over some of the changes that we recommended. There's basically 5 minor changes. The first one is we've changed the text to not require carbon monoxide in a commercial building when the building is not occupied. Carbon monoxide sources are removed or disabled. That each exterior opening is secured from entry by unauthorized individuals, and that no attached garage is in use and is secured from use. The second one pertains to the requirement for carbon monoxide detection where the detection zone is greater than 10,000 square feet, where we allow and accept, where the base requirement is that a detector be placed within 100 feet of every point within the detection zone. And there was an exception where there is only one carbon monoxide source, that only one carbon monoxide detector would have to be placed there if it was placed between the source and the remainder of the detection zone. We modified that exception to allow more than one carbon monoxide source to exist without having detection throughout the entire detection area when each source has a carbon monoxide detector between the source and the remainder of the detection zone. The third modification is to allow existing plug-in or port-type carbon monoxide alarm or battery operated carbon monoxide alarm with battery life less than 10 years, to allow them to remain in place to satisfy the detection requirements in this rule text if they were installed to satisfy the current residential carbon monoxide detection requirements that we have in place right now for residential occupancies. The fourth one is to allow combination carbon monoxide smoke alarms to remain and satisfy the requirements for detection when they were installed to satisfy the current residential carbon monoxide detection requirements. And the last change is that we updated the reference standard of NFPA 780 from the 2008 edition to the 2015 edition. That's basically all the minor changes that we made. And again, today we're asking the Code Council to adopt this as a permanent rule and adopt it as an emergency rule of readoption so that we cover the period between now and when the permanent rule will be filed in the state register.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions that members of the council have for Mark on the changes that are being proposed to the rule that as he just described? no questions, let's begin discussion. Again, we're looking for action from the council on this agenda item. Discussion. Mr. Flanagan? Joe, you'd like to add a clarification?
Point of clarification, the emergency rule technically is not a readoption of the existing version of the rule. It would be an emergency adoption of the new version. It is necessary to bridge the gap to a permanent
Can you speak up?
adoption of the new version of the rule.
Can you hear us?
Thank you for the clarification.
I'm not sure we got that. Can you repeat that again? Can Joe repeat what he just said again?
Yes. I just wanted to make one technical correction to Mark's presentation. The emergency adoption will not be a readoption of the existing version of the rule. It will be an emergency adoption of the new version.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Flanagan?
I move that the code council finds and determine that the adoption of the rule identified in agenda item 3, code change adoption, carbon monoxide detection in restaurants and commercial buildings, as an emergency rule, as the permanent rule will not have a significant environmental impact and will not have a significant adverse effect on any significant fish or wildlife scenic resources of statewide significance, important agricultural land, or area included in an approved local waterfront revitalization code, and I further move that Mark Plunk be authorized to sign and deliver on behalf of the Code Council and the Department of State, 1, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, short environmental assessment, 2, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, negative declaration, 3, the New York State Department of State Coastal Management Program Coastal Assessment Fund, and 4, the certificate of no significant coastal impact. So moved.
It's a motion by Mr. Flanagan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Torpey. Discussion on the motion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next two agenda items, we have two more motions. Oh, excuse me. I apologize, Mr. Flanagan, you have more to say.
I move that the Code Council find and determine that the adoption of the rule identified in agenda item 3, code change adoption.
Please use the microphone.
I move that the Code Council find and determine that the adoption of the rule identified in agenda item 3, code change adoption, carbon monoxide detection in restaurants and commercial buildings, on an emergency basis, as authorized by Section 202 of the State Administrative Procedure Act, is required to preserve public safety and general welfare because 1, Executive Law 378 5D, as added by Chapter 541 of the laws of 2014, provides that the Uniform Code must contain provisions requiring the installation of carbon monoxide detecting devices in every commercial building and every building that contains one or more restaurants. 2, Executive Law 378 5D became effective on June 27, 2015. 3, this rule implemented Executive Law 378 5D by amending the Uniform Code by adding provisions requiring the installation of carbon monoxide detection devices in commercial buildings. 4, by reason of the previously filed emergency adoption, the previously filed emergency readoption, the prior version of this rule became effective on June 27, 2015, and will remain in effect through November 19, 2015. 5, the rule reflects non-substantial changes to the prior revision of this rule that were made in response to comments received during the public discussion. 6, adoption of this rule as a permanent measure will not be effective until the notice of adoption is published in the state register. 7, the notice of adoption relating to this adoption of this rule as a permanent measure will not be filed in time for such notice of adoption to appear in the state register before November 19, 2015. And 8, adopting this rule on an emergency basis, filing the notice of emergency adoption on November 20th, 2015, and make the emergency adoption of this rule effective immediately on the filing of the notice of the emergency adoption are necessary to assure that the Uniform Code will continue to include provision contemplated by Substandard 5B of Executive Law 378 between November 20th, 2015, and the date on which the notice of adoption relating to the adoption of this rule as a permanent measure will appear in the state register. I further move that the Code Council find and determine that making the emergency adoption of this rule identified in Agenda Item 3, Code Change Adoption, carbon monoxide detection in restaurants and commercial buildings, effective immediately on the filing of this notice of emergency adoption, as authorized by Executive Law 378, 15A, is required to protect health, safety, and security, because in the absence of such finding and determination, the amendment of this Uniform Code to be implemented by this rule would not become effective until 90 days after publication of the notice of emergency adoption. And for the reasons stated above, this rule must become effective on November 20th, 2015. And I further move that the rule identified in Agenda Item 3, Code Change Adoption, carbon monoxide detection in restaurants and commercial buildings, be adopted as an emergency rule, that the notice of emergency adoption for such adoption be filed on November 20th, 2015, and that the emergency rule be effective on the date of the filing of such notice of emergency adoption. So moved.
Motion by Mr. Flanagan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Torpey. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Flanagan, I suspect you're not quite finished.
I move that the Code Council find and determine that the adoption of the rule identified in Agenda Item 3, Code Change Adoption, carbon monoxide detection in restaurants and commercial buildings, is a permanent rule, and making such permanent adoption effective immediately upon publication of the notice of adoption are required to protect the health, safety, and security because 1, Executive Law 378 5B, as added by the Chapter 541 of the laws of 2014, provides that the Uniform Code must contain provisions requiring the installation of carbon monoxide detection devices in every commercial building and every building that contains one or more restaurants. 2, Executive Law 378 5B became effective on June 27, 2015. 3, by reason of this previously filed emergency adoption and previously filed emergency readoption, the prior version of this rule became effective on June 27, 2015, and remain in effect through November 19, 2015. 4, the Code Council has adopted this rule, which reflects non-substantial changes to the prior version of the rule, as an emergency measure, and is directed that the notice of emergency adoption be filed on November 20, 2015, the day following the expiration of the previous version emergency adoption of this rule will become effective on the date that the notice of the emergency adoption is filed, on or before November 20th, 2015, and expire 90 days thereafter, on or after February 18th, 2015. Code Council, under number 6, the Code Council will now also adopt this rule as a permanent measure. 7, it is anticipated that the notice of adoption of this rule as a permanent measure will be filed on or about the same date as the filing of the notice of emergency adoption of this rule as an emergency measure, that is, on or about November 20th, 2015. 8, a notice of adoption filed on November 20th will appear in the State Register on December 9th, 2015. 9, pertaining to action. Executive Law 378-15A. The adoption of this rule as a permanent measure will not affect until 90 days after the date on which the notice of adoption appears in the State Register, unless the Code Council finds that the early effective date is necessary to protect health, safety, and security. 10, making the adoption of this rule effective on a date earlier than March 8, 2016, 90 days after the date on which the notice of adoption will appear in the State Register, is necessary to protect health, safety, and security because in the absence of an earlier effective date, the emergency adoption of this rule will expire before the permanent adoption of this rule becomes effective. I further move that the rule identified in Agenda Item 3, Code Change Adoption, carbon monoxide detection in restaurants and commercial buildings, be adopted as a permanent rule, that the notice of adoption for the permanent adoption be filed on November 20th, 2015, and that the permanent rule be effective on the date of publication of such notice of adoption. So moved.
Motion by Mr. Flanagan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Torkin. Discussion on the motion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, now we are moving on to agenda items 4 and 5. We'll take them simultaneously. These are related to the Energy Code and Uniform Code updates. We're not looking for any action from the council at this time. However, we felt that because of the significant amount of work that has gone into the development of these rulemaking documents, the significant period of time that we have been working on these documents, and also the fact that in the course of our development of these documents, we've actually had some new members of the council who have come on board, one of which we have just welcomed today. We thought this was a good time for us to provide a more detailed report to you on the status of the rulemaking document and give you a little bit of a preview of some of the technical information that will be contained in these rulemakings as we prepare to move forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mark to provide a summary overview of what we're going to be talking about, and then Mark will proceed with introducing some of our technical staff at the Department of State.
Yes, as Ron said, over the last about 3 years, we began the Uniform Code and Energy Code update process. Lots of different directions, originally going into the 2012 I-codes, then changing direction to the 2015 I-codes, and then with the instruction to reduce the number of amendments we have. So, with it, especially given the fact that over the last 3 years we have 11 new Code Council members that may not have heard all these discussions we've had over the last 3 years, this is the opportunity for us to just kind of summarize it and give you an overview and pull it all together. And we plan on providing you with what we believe are the more significant decisions that were made, the more significant changes that we'll see going from our current code to new codes. We're going to begin with the Energy Code, presented by Joe Hill.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Joseph Hill, Assistant Director for Code Administration. For the past several months, we have worked through several iterations of rulemaking for the adoption of the IECC 2015 and ASHRAE 90.1 2013. I'm happy to report that we are very close and should be filing a notice of adoption for proposed rulemaking in a very short period of time. Some of the highlights of these code adoptions. Well, first of all, you should realize that the state energy law, Article 11 of the state energy law, has a couple of governing requirements for adoption of these codes. What the state law says is that any update to the commercial provisions of the energy code must be at least as restrictive as the 2007 edition of ASHRAE 90.1. And for the residential code, any adoption must be at least as restrictive as the most current version of the IECC. The U.S. Department of Energy has provided us studies which indicate that both are true. Also, federal requirements for the adoption of both commercial and residential energy codes. What those adoptions say is as follows. Once the Secretary of Energy makes a determination that the most current version of the ASHRAE 90.1, which is ASHRAE 90.1 2013, is more restrictive than ASHRAE 90.1 2010, states have a period of 2 years from that determination to adopt these codes. For the federal determination, that date was September 2014. Moving forward, our proposed adoption and potential effective dates put us in good stead to meet that requirement. A similar determination was made for the residential code on June of this year, through 2015. So we should be well within the 2-year period for that adoption. Cost studies. Article 11 of the New York State Energy Code requires that any change to the code, or any changes to the code, you must consider a payback period of 10 years, meaning that any change to the code must, in effect, pay for itself by energy savings in the 10-year period. The U.S. Department of Energy has provided us with a study that for the residential code, which in effect we're jumping from the 2009 IECC to the 2015 IECC, we have a very short payback period of 3 years, and a fairly significant energy savings of 28%. For the commercial energy code, the Darras Corporation of New York City has provided us with a similar study, which is also borne out by the U.S. Department of Energy. We have a commercial payback period of 2.5 years. There are factors which make that energy study slightly different than the energy study for residential buildings. I won't get into that now. Commercial. Some of the highlights of the significant changes of the commercial energy code. Roof deck insulation. Roof deck insulation is there's an upgrade from R25 to R30 climate design zones 4 and 5. This is not that significant for high-rise buildings. However, for low-rise buildings, it's a fairly significant increase. Boiler modulation of boiler turn down. In a mechanical efficiency scenario, it's best to match the boiler or a heating plant to the load encountered by the building. You can imagine a 1 million BTU boiler running full force when when the building is actually calling for 100,000 cooling. What this requirement does, in effect, is allows the boiler in that building to cycle back to more effectively meet the load that's encountered. And coincidentally, all of these changes that I'm describing have been listed in the U.S. Department of Energy study as being the most significant effective changes to energy efficiency. Refrigeration systems. This is something that's never been regulated before. Any site-constructed or site-assembled cooler and freezer systems, including all of the doors, glazing, lighting, and motors, are now regulated by the Energy Code. This is true of both the ICC and 90.1. Lighting controls and lighting systems. Lighting loads on commercial buildings are a significant part of the energy code, 20 to 30% of the building load. What these changes do is they attenuate lighting control systems and also a graduated step down of the lighting levels in any particular space in the building. This, of course, excludes building exits, foyers, stairs, and any life safety exiting component of the building. Don't want to turn down lighting in those areas. What this does is it steps down progressively the lighting levels from 100% to 70%, 50%, 30%, and then eventually off when the occupants leave that space. That's a fairly significant uptick in the energy conservation provisions of the building. And then further, lighting power density. Lighting power densities have been stepped back again, a fairly significant percentage. And what this does, in effect, is it mandates that the best available lighting source be utilized. One of the highest efficacy lighting systems utilized in any particular space. Additional efficiency package actions. In the prior code, or in the code that we have now, there are only 3 additional efficiency package options. This is significant in that if you're complying with the ICC, you must choose one of 3 additional efficiency package options, which can be quite limiting. The new code adds 3. Those being enhanced lighting controls over and above what's required, dedicated outdoor air system, or high efficiency service water heating system. So now we have 6. Now this applies only to prescriptive provisions of the energy code. However, prescriptive provisions, which are a factor of COMCHEC, are quite heavily used. So it's a significant change. Residential buildings, probably the largest change is the mandate now for lower door testing, ACH 50 test. There's been some controversy over this. For some builders, this will be no change. For some builders, this will be, let's say, a learning curve. How do we meet that 3-year change per hour standard? And again, some builders say they will do nothing different. What this change brings with it is requirement for
They're all
mechanical
there.
ventilation systems.
Everybody.
All buildings.
We'll see.
Once we drop below 5 air changes per hour
9
in a residential building,
referral job on November 18th.
by the
5
mechanical
p.m.
sections of the residential code, we are required to provide mechanical
Could we do
ventilation
a 5
to that
p.m.?
building. The idea here is not only to provide fresh air for occupants, but also to create a life safety situation so that we're not backdrafting any naturally aspirated, ventilated mechanical systems that are fuel burning. Duct testing. Duct testing standard drops to 4 CFM per 100 square feet of building area. From what I understand, that's fairly significant and fairly tough to meet. However, if all of the ducts are contained within the thermal boundary of the building, that test is not required. Additionally, building cavities may not be utilized as ductwork, neither supply nor return. And again, another significant positive change. When building cavities are utilized for return air plenums, routinely they leak, and they introduce outdoor air, and they depressurize the building, which is another potential life safety issue. We have a few building envelope upgrades. R49 will now be required in climate zones 4 and 5 for ceilings, attic attics and ceilings, and in climate design zone 6, cannot build a wood frame wall without continuous insulation of the exterior. Keeping in mind, these are straight prescriptive requirements. They can be traded off in a res check situation or in a building modeling situation. Which brings me to the last point, which is the ERI, or Energy Rating Index. The Energy Rating Index is a new provision which has been added to the Residential Energy Code. And it's one that's been strongly supported by the National Association of Home Builders when it was brought into the ICC in 2015. This incorporates the ResNet rating system, which is a system similar to what's used for Energy Star buildings. And the National Association of Home Builders have indicated that this is a significant dollar savings for them. Although it's a new method that has to be learned, and with any new method, there's generally a learning curve. A ResNet rater must be involved in this system. However, the National Home Builders Association study indicates that on average, they can save $1,700 per single-family dwelling unit, which is not peanuts. It's fairly significant savings. That's why they backed it. So, in conclusion, I think you can see that, especially for residential systems, there are a lot of changes coming down the pipe. And at this point, I will take any questions that any of you think have.
Okay, members of the council, are there any questions for Joe on some of the changes that he outlined for the Energy Code?
Must have done a great job.
No questions. Thank you, Joe.
Welcome.
Okay, next we're going to go over the codes that form part of the uniform code. We've been working hard at putting together all the entire package for the uniform code update. And at this point, we are cautiously confident that we may be able to submit a notice of proposed rulemaking in the next couple of weeks. Once we do that, the notice of proposed rulemaking may appear in the state register by the end of this month. And this will begin the public comment period. So I'm going to begin with the building code, followed by the property maintenance code, and then we'll hear from others on the remaining codes. In the building code, there is a new section that deals with a new term called live-work units that is defined as a dwelling unit or sleeping unit in which significant portion of the space includes a non-residential use that is operated by the tenant. This is very similar to the home occupation concept that we have in our current residential code. That is a New York State amendment. And this allows the non-residential uses in residential occupancies under limited conditions. And what it does in the end is that it relieves some of the requirements that are normally required, including fire separation requirements. It allows spiral stairways, which is never allowed or rarely allowed in non-commercial occupancies. It allows vertical openings without an enclosure. It allows shared plumbing facilities between residential and non-residential areas. Then there will be a new section that deals with ambulatory healthcare facilities. These are portions of buildings that are used to provide medical or surgical or similar services on a less than 24-hour basis to individuals who are rendered incapable of self-preservation by the services that are provided there. This is currently allowed in and classified as business group occupancies. It's primarily doctors' offices, dentist offices that perform procedures where people just can't suddenly respond to an emergency and evacuate the building. What this does is it still allows the ambulatory care facilities to remain as a Group B business occupancy, but it adds some fire safety features to that, including fire separation requirements, some smoke compartments with independent egress, automatic sprinkler system, and fire alarm systems. And there are a lot of changes in the new building code that will affect high-rise buildings, especially buildings over 420 feet in height. There are new requirements for structural integrity, for interior stair enclosures. There are increased minimum bond strength requirements for spray fire-resistant materials. There is a new requirement for at least 2 sprinkler risers for each sprinkler zone. A new requirement for an additional stairway. This is an additional stairway that is added on after all the number of stairways that are determined in the code are calculated, and then because it's a building more than 420 feet in height, it adds another stairway. The exception to that rule is that it would also allow, in lieu of that additional stairway, an occupant self-evacuation elevator. There'd be a new requirement for fire pumps to be supplied by no fewer than 2 water mains located in different streets. And all high-rise buildings will now have a new requirement for luminous egress path markings for the means of egress. There'll be some reductions in the allowable height of certain buildings, the allowable height measured in stories. For type 2B construction, that's non-combustible, unprotected construction, business occupancy buildings will be reduced from 4 stories to 3 stories. Mercantile occupancies will be reduced from 4 stories to 2 stories. Under type 3B construction, this is ordinary construction with combustible materials but non-combustible exterior walls and 2-hour fire-rated exterior walls. In that category, business occupancy buildings will be reduced from 4 stories to 3 stories. Mercantile from 4 stories to 2 stories. Moderate hazard storage buildings from 3 stories to 2 stories. And low hazard storage buildings will be reduced from 4 stories to 3 stories. There'll be a new requirement for bracing members in buildings. These are members that are essential to the vertical stability of the building, that they will now be required to have a fire resistance rating consistent with the type of construction for the building. That is not in our current code right now. Be a new requirement for firewalls, fire barriers, fire partitions, smoke barriers, and smoke petitions, requiring these elements to be marked with an identification on the wall that says suggested wording as fire and or smoke barrier, protect all opening. This would be stenciled on the wall so anyone in the future that would be performing alterations to the building would be alerted to the fact that this particular separation is required to satisfy some other code requirement, that they don't do something to unprotect the doors or windows if there were any. The current code, dwelling units are required to have 2 exits once the calculated occupant load exceeds 10 occupants. The 2015 building code, International Building Code, changes that to 20 occupants of that. You could now have 1 exit in a dwelling unit or up to 20 occupants. After that, then you would be required to add the 2nd exit. There's a requirement for storm shelters. It's not really significant through most of the state, but it affects a small part of the state. This would require emergency facilities, police stations, fire stations, emergency evacuation centers, and schools that are located in a tornado zone of 250 miles per hour to be designed to have, to meet a storm shelter design parameter for, to resist extra wind loads and to allow people to be in a safe location. The area of the state that this would cover is a very small part of the state in the very far west, south corner of the state. In our current code, we have provisions that allow unlimited building areas for certain occupancies, certain mixed occupancies. Our current code does not include Group H5 occupancies, which are semiconductor fabrication facilities and similar research and development areas that use hazardous production materials. The 2015 International Building Code has a provision now that would allow unlimited area under certain conditions. There'll be a new requirement for hotels to have floor-level exit signs. That's in the 2015 codes. Be a lot of changes for accessibility requirements for recreational facilities. This will include accessibility requirements for recreation boating facilities, fishing piers and platforms, miniature golf courses, shooting facilities with firing positions, swimming pools, and amusement rides. We'll have two significant amendments to the International Building Code. One deals with health care facilities located in special flood hazard areas. And what it would require is for a temporary hookup of external generators, boilers, and chillers. There'll be a new requirement for certain residential buildings, 5 or more stories in height, that rely on the assistance of pumps to provide water, potable water to the upper levels. This amendment would be add a new requirement to have to provide potable water at the lower levels in case the pumps fail due to an emergency. There's some amendments that we have right now that will remain. One is for accessibility. It deals with the 8-foot access aisle for accessible parking spaces. The requirement for a no parking sign in front of the accessible access aisle for parking spaces. Continuation of the enhanced Type 2B dwelling unit requirements that would that continues to require maneuvering clearances in the front of doors and enhance accessibility for at least one bathroom facility in the dwelling unit. We'll continue our ground snow load map that we have. For rough sawn lumber, we will continue to have to allow lumber producing mills to grade lumber for certain types and sizes of buildings. And we still have the swimming pool requirements that includes provisions for barriers, gates, and alarms. That's what I have for the building code. Here available for any questions if anybody has any.
Any questions for Mark on the technical changes and requirements that he summarized for the building?
Over here. The luminous exit marking requirement, does that apply to high-rise residential building as well, R2 occupancies?
Yes, it would apply to that.
And the 420 feet tall additional exit requirement, does that apply to residential R2 occupancies?
I believe it does, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Hamlin?
Yes, fire barrier labeling. How exactly do you see that being executed there as far as commercial goes?
You're talking about the stenciling on the fire barrier walls? Yes. I believe the way it's written, it would allow something like that to be above like a drop ceiling or something where you wouldn't be out, you wouldn't be looking at it. That it could be in a location, but if somebody were to perform alterations to it, that they would see it at that point in time.
Okay, so it's advised to be outside.
Yes.
Okay.
Additional questions? Okay, seeing none, Mark, you're going to go through the property maintenance code?
Yes, the changes to the property maintenance code. A couple of changes. One is that there will be a requirement for locking devices for doors, windows, basement hatches of dwelling units and sleeping units. There's a change that requires living rooms, the minimum size area of a living room for when there's one or two occupants to be at least 120 square feet. New requirement for public access and use of public toilet facilities. A new section that requires systems to be repaired or replaced when exposed to water. Those are primarily the significant changes that come about because of the 2015 International Property Maintenance Code. But we have some amendments in New York State that we are going to add to that. One is the obvious requirement for swimming pool enclosure requirements and alarm requirements. We will continue the summer camp occupant load requirements that to maintain the 40 square feet per occupant when single beds are provided and 30 square feet per occupant when double deck beds are provided. This compares to 50 square feet per occupant that you would find in the 2015 International Property Maintenance Code. And then we have all the amendments that are related to owner-occupied dwellings that provides relief from certain requirements when a building is occupied by its owner, including relief from the plumbing requirements, water supply requirements, water drainage requirements, heating system requirements, and electrical system requirements. These are all in our current code, and they are allowed to have the exception from these facilities or these systems when approved by the authority having jurisdiction. But that will continue in the property maintenance code. And that's really all I have for the property maintenance code. I'm available for any questions.
Any questions for Mark on the property maintenance code? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to the residential code. Mark?
Yes, Miriam MacGyver from our staff will be giving us an update on the residential code.
Hi, I'm going to talk first about three that we in the residential that's being one is the change in
Microphone, please.
It's on. Just speak up. Speak a little louder into it, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
The section, chapter 3, the planning chapter, changes a couple things regarding protection of openings that will change both what's required and where protection of openings are required. We have currently in the residential code of New York State, we require openings to be protected in areas of windborne debris areas, such as the current Long Island and New York coastal areas. And the protection of openings consists of putting shutters or panels over the glazed openings, windows and doors, or we do allow now that a building can be built stronger. It can have structural provisions that allow the building to withstand increased forces if the windows break and wind gets in the building. So you have the wind on the outside pulling the roof and walls out, and wind getting into the building will then push the walls and windows out. This change will remove that exception. It's a New York State exception that we had carried over from previous codes. So now all buildings will require shutters or panels to protect the glazed opening. And that would stop debris and water from getting into the building and causing damage and possible injury to people from broken glass or debris. Another change that's happening is the windborne debris area is smaller. We updated our maps based on ICC, and that's based on the standard, an industry accepted standard from the American Society of Civil Engineers. And that map is continually updated on the past 10 years of hurricanes. So right now, the map, our current map in use shows the eastern third of Long Island and areas within a mile of coast on the rest of Long Island being windborne debris areas. The revised map will only show the eastern third of Long Island areas that are within a mile of coast. So not all of the eastern third of Long Island, but just areas within a mile of the coast on the eastern third of Long Island. It's a much smaller area. The result of this change is both a cost increase and decrease. The areas that are no longer in a windborne debris area will not have to have impact-resistant glazing or shutters or panels, but the areas that are still that mile of coast on the eastern third of Long Island may have some increases in cost because they have lost the option of designing a building as partially enclosed instead of protecting the glazing. They will have the benefit that they, when there is a storm or hurricane, there likely be less damage of the building. Another change in the planning chapter, we now will require mechanical ventilation in dwelling units, where before you could use either natural ventilation or mechanical ventilation. Joe just talked to you about the change in the energy code. Buildings will be tighter. That will reduce the cost of heating. There's a payback time. So we'll have, all in all, there's a cost savings. Because the buildings are tighter, we need mechanical ventilation to get the moisture out and fresh air in. I'm not going to go into great depth on that. John will talk to you about the plumbing, mechanical, and fuel gas provisions in the residential code, but the sum of it is that all new dwellings will require mechanical ventilation. We put together a cost estimate that the increase in cost could range from $200 to $1,400, depending on the extent and type of system installed. The most energy efficient systems would be the most expensive, and those would be systems that have heat recovery or energy recovery units for both outdoor and exhaust air. The least expensive will just provide a ventilation fan system. Another significant change, I'm jumping to the end of the residential code, the Section 8, the electrical chapters, will go from being based on the 2008 edition of the National Electric Code to the 2014 edition of the National Electric Code. And you've heard a lot of people talk to you about the importance of using the latest version of the electrical code. It's a predominant electrical safety standard in the country, and it's revised every 3 years. It's revised to add things like new technology, new safety, address new safety concerns, add safety requirements for new equipment. Often in construction, both the designers, contractors, inspectors refer to the latest edition. They have to comply with the 2008 edition, but they will refer to the newest edition because the old edition doesn't cover some new equipment. There may be some small increase in construction costs. For instance, their receptacles in laundry and kitchen areas will have to have ground fault circuit interrupters or GFCI protection, and that's required in wet areas to prevent lethal levels of electricity. The cost of a 20 amp GFCI is about $6.50 compared to $1.25 for one without GFCI protection. Or you could have protect the whole circuit breaker for about $36 as opposed to about $4. New requirements for kitchen and laundry areas also have to have AFCI protection or fault circuit interruption. That protects against short circuiting, like if as a mouse. I always think of a mouse chewing on a wire in the mouth. So that has a similar cost increase. The numbers are a little different, but the same order of magnitude. And then just to go through roughly the rest of the code. So we replace all of the IRC Chapter 1 with New York State Chapter 1. One difference is we will add the live work units that Mark discussed. That section is being added to the residential code as well as the building code. We do have a provision that allows owner occupation per Appendix J as well as live work units. So owner occupation per Appendix J has some less stringent requirements than live work units. We also are adding a definition, or IRC added a definition of lodging houses. And that definition is very similar to bed and breakfast, which we have in the New York Code by statute and will have to be covered by New York State specific statute required bed and breakfast. There's a new definition that allows habitable attics, which is interesting. It has to have a floor area of at least 70 square feet, and it can be used as an attic. It continues to be an attic. It does not count as a story. Habitable. Some other new definitions provide definitions for new materials, for plastic laminated lumber, things like new solar system terms, new terms for stairs. There are definitions for nosing, risers, stairs, stairways, winders. I mean, there has been argument, what is a stairway, what is a flight of stairs? A flight of stairs, there may be two flights to go up one story, but people have at times disagreed about that. So this just clarifies we have one definition that we're using. Most of the definitions are clarifications, adding definitions of new material or new technology. Like building integrated PV panels, so photovoltaic panels that are part of the roof, shingle, plastic composite materials. There's also definitions regarding solar thermal systems. In the building planning, we are now allowing specifically alternate provisions for log cabins, and that will include some wall coverings. We're using the ICC standard 400, which is the standard for design and construction of log structures. We're using the new wind design criteria. The IRC changed from using basic wind speed to ultimate wind speed. So the numbers look different. But I think the bigger change is that the high wind areas are further out on Long Island. As with the wind-borne debris, less of New York is going to be in high wind areas. We have a new section on sunrooms that requires sunrooms to meet certain specifications that are in a standard documentation. And it requires them to have emergency egress and some energy efficiency that we didn't provide before. We also require topographic wind effect areas and local areas that have localized geographic conditions. They will have to consider certain wind effects. We put all the fire protection provisions in one area now. There is a provision that allows dwellings with sprinklers to have lesser protection in their exterior walls than others, and there's also less protection. We like with townhouses, we go from 1 hour or 2 hour walls if you don't have sprinklers to 1 hour walls. With townhouses that have sprinklers, there's a less protection between two-family dwellings as well. We have a provision that requires floor assemblies not otherwise required by the residential code to be fire resistant rated to be protected on the underside with half-inch gypsum board, 5/8 wood structural panel or equivalent. So that would be within a basement, or the ceiling of a basement, for instance, may require having gypsum or membrane panel. We removed the area for minimum room, the provision for minimum room areas. So the requirement for at least one habitable room to be no less than 120 square feet is no longer in the residential code. And we added a requirement that all basements that will have an emergency escape and rescue opening, even uninhabited. Some more types of stairs are allowed, as long as they're not part of the means of egress. We are now allowing alternating tread devices, shift ladders, and winding stairs in more situations. We will now require window fall protection, and that's been in the residential code, the IRC for a while. New York State did not include that. Now New York State in section R312.2 will require window fall protection in certain windows. Will require things like foam plastic wind resistance. So when you have foam plastic sheathing on frame exterior walls, it will now have a requirement to resist wind load unless installed over sheathing in wind load. So that wasn't in there. We have the flood resistant construction has been revised to be more resilient, to provide more protection and resilience for homes. The new language says dwellings in coastal A zones must be requirements for coastal high hazard areas. So that includes open foundations, pilings, or columns, an exception that allows filled stem walls. And it will require flood-resistant material that conforms to a FEMA standard in areas below the flood zone. The new language says that the design flood elevation and freeboard requirements apply to the lowest structural, the bottom of the frame in manufacture. In terms of, and it says that tanks, for instance, petroleum, your fuel oil tank, low grade, will have to be anchored. Wells below the design flood elevation will have breakaway walls, and coastal A zones will have to have flood openings. If you do want to build a storm shelter, unlike the building code, none are required in the residential code, but if you elect to build one, it will have to meet the same standard, the ICC standard 500 for storm shelters. The chapter 4, the foundation chapter, it's reorganized. Mostly that's the biggest thing in chapter 4. It's reorganized to clarify cables. There are some added provisions that there are cables now for for structural inflated panels where there did not used to be. So the provisions for wall thickness and reinforcement are mostly clarified by being reorganized. In Chapter 5, the chapter on floor design, again, the tables are reorganized. It's largely clarification. However, there has been addition of a table that includes 3-story cold form steel frame structure. So the cold form steel framing is now included in the table. There's also a provision of addition of prescriptive requirements for deck connection to dwellings, and that's partly because that is actually has been a cause of injury and death in residential homes. Decks have not been attached correctly to buildings, and they address that in that. Wall construction, again, the tables were reorganized for clarity. And to use the ultimate minimum speed rather than the basic minimum speed, mostly technical accuracy and clarity has been improved. And structural insulated panels have also been added to Chapter 6 to the wall design. Wall covering adds new requirements for wind resistance for exterior wall covering. It adds provisions where log cabins are exempted as long as they meet ICC 400. There are some prescriptive requirements added, for instance, for anchoring of masonry with veneers and for the requirements for lintels on masonry veneers expanded. Tables are reorganized to be more user-friendly. And roof ceiling requirements in Chapter 8 are also reorganized. So there's been a lot of reorganization throughout the code. They've tried to improve clarity. They've addressed comments about that the table should be more user-friendly. In Chapter 9, roof assembly limits are placed on Class A roof assembly, so some materials have to be installed on non-combustible decks, others on over-combustible decks. So they provide the information that metal sheets, shingles, clay, concrete tile, or slate can be on non-combustible decks, while certain other ones are prescribed for combustible decks. The Chapter 10, chimneys and fireplace, has been reorganized. There's some minimum dimensions now specified for smoke chambers. New language limits the angle and number of factory-built offset masonry chimneys. Have to have a cap of a certain dimension that has been specified now. And masonry heaters now have to comply with 2 standards, either ASTM standard, and a UL standard, while before it was only 1. And that's it. I'm going to let John talk about the plumbing standards.
Any questions for Miriam? Mr. DeRucher?
Yes, I noticed that you had indicated there was some new provisions in 2015 IRC about habitable homes.
There's a new definition of habitable attic, yes.
Okay. And how does that relate to our current code right now, where we talk about changes to attics or top floors of buildings and buildings or 2-story buildings? How does that relate to what we have today?
A habitable attic does not constitute a storage, so you have a habitable attic, and there are the habitable attic is defined in Chapter 2, basically as it has a limit in size. Actually, I should look at the definition.
70 square feet. So I guess my question is this, are we getting into a situation, I don't know the answer here, so I'm asking the question, are we getting into a situation where we now have attics that are going to be modified or added and not be counted as a story? Habitable, it could be a third level, a third story.
No, that discussion, there was a lot of discussion about that in, well, actually, you were on the subcommittee. A lot of discussion on that. I'm sure there was a lot of discussion on I agree as well. I believe that would provide for a third term. It provides for after that. I can't add more. I can't really answer your question. It looks to me like there's going to be something that third story.
Okay, going on to another question, you had indicated new definition for lodging houses. I believe that definition is also in the building code, if I'm not mistaken. It refers to a lodging house with 10 or less number of occupants, and we can utilize the residential code instead of the building code. And that's very close to the definition we see in New York for bed and breakfast, even though the bed and breakfast may be something a little different. I guess the question that I have is, has that specific item been discussed regarding lodging houses and the attics, specifically on new construction requirements in the ICC that talks about residential sprinklers? And are we going to allow lodging houses that are newly built, and I'm talking about bed and breakfast, to be without that same protection the ICC is indicating?
As you know, we've adopted the I-Code's minimal provisions. As far as I know, there's no, in fact, we have not modified those provisions of the I-Code.
I guess my question is, are we getting into some areas that we haven't discussed yet regarding newly built lodging houses, and newly built attics, which were third levels, that we're reducing or taking away the sprinkler requirement, or those previously required by the ICC? Has that been discussed at all?
I don't think we're taking away any. I mean, I'm afraid I'm not understanding your question. We are.
If I could, I don't think it's been discussed by the council in the context that you're suggesting.
Yeah, I think we were talking 1- and 2-story single-family detached and 1- and 2-story townhouses. And 3-story, we got into the sprinkler requirement. I'm just wondering if we're running into an item that's going to be missed just because of some nuances that may exist with building a brand new lodging and rooming house, or whatever that definition is, or adding a third floor to a building. There's currently an appendix in the residential code that talks about how you deal with that. And that's very common in older facilities. I think it's something in the residential code we need to look at. So it's more of a comment, and I'd like to have the Department of State at least look at what those issues are, and if we're getting into something that we didn't understand or talk about earlier.
We'll look at that, and we'll provide some analysis to the council.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Miriam? Thank you, Miriam.
Okay, before we move forward, I'd like to go back to a question by Keith Wen about his question on additional exits in high-rise buildings, in this case more than 420 feet in height, whether that also applied to R2 apartment buildings. My answer was that it did. That was what I believed was correct. I just looked that up and found out that it does not apply to R2 occupancies. Also, while I was looking at that, I don't think Mr. Wen asked the question, but with regard to luminous egress path markings, that also does not apply to R2 occupancies.
Thank you.
The next topic is for the plumbing code, mechanical code, and fuel gas code. Will be presented by John Ariel.
Good morning. What I'm going to do is kind of highlight some of the items in the mechanical code first, and then, if it's okay, I'm going to go to the plumbing, and then the fuel gas, and then we can, if there's any questions on each of the code, update on each code. One of the most significant changes to the mechanical code and the residential as far as is mechanical ventilation. You heard Miriam and Joe Hill talk about the mechanical ventilation for 1 and 2 family. The only thing I'll add to that, since they already mentioned that, is that it doesn't have to be a balanced system like a commercial system. You can rely on infiltration air. So an exhaust fan that's been installed in a bathroom can be used as part of that makeup air for ventilation. They can either run continuously or in with a certain amount of CFM. And the big change as far as commercial ventilation in Chapter 4 in the mechanical code is they revised it updated to the current ASHRAE standard 62.1, which is the mechanical ventilation standard, basically by the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. So that's a substantial change, and that actually might be very good. Currently, we're using the 89 standard. The other significant change is maximum duct length of dryer exhaust has been increased to 35 feet. Basically, they're looking at the actual fittings now. So if the duct or the dryer is installed and it doesn't have the manual, it doesn't have the actual length of duct that it can actually be installed to, you can actually use 35 feet, and it actually looks at the actual fittings that are being used. So that allows a little more flexibility in the location of the dryer. New code actually now requires locking access caps on refrigeration units, outdoor units, either the locking cap on the valve for the refrigeration or that it's inaccessible or non-accessible. That's significant because in other parts of the United States, they've had issues with popping. Kids think they open the valves and they read the refrigerant. That would require whenever the refrigerant is recharged or a new unit is put in. New and existing mechanical systems must be maintained in accordance with ASHRAE 180, which is a maintenance standard. So now if the code official sees that units aren't running or the system isn't running properly, they can actually say the building is not being maintained. Code now requires any combustible material in a return air plenum to be listed and labeled and verified that it's in compliance with ASTM E84 and or UL 723. And that applies to both the mechanical plumbing and the gas code. Air dispersion systems, which are the fabric ducts that you see in auditoriums or large buildings, those actually have to be listed now. And there's a specific section that addresses those. Electric cooking appliances are exempt from requiring a type hood when they're basically they put out a limited amount of grease. Exhaust requirements for manicure and pedicure stations have been updated and revised and actually require a source capture system for each station. New section now recognizes use of inline dryer exhaust, which allows additional flexibility in location of the dryer. And then, and I talked about balancing of the help out ventilation system. So any questions on mechanical?
Any questions for John?
Plumbing. Field installed shower liners must now be leak tested in the field, so it needs to be verified by the code official that they're actually leak proof. Code clarifies that sinks utilized for cleaning food utensils, pots, pans, serviceware must be connected indirectly to the sanitary system. That wasn't really clear in the current code, but it has been questioned, and now it's actually clarified. It needs an Public toilet facilities must have directional signage for route to the facilities. All plumbing products are required to be listed by third-party certification agencies, which includes pipe and fittings. Single stack vent system is now allowed, which is the Philadelphia vent, which is actually a vertical, similar to a combination waste and vent, that's vertical. That's now allowed. Sizing requirements for roof drain systems has been completely revised. It's actually now based on flow data rather than roof area. The weighted average of lead content in drinking water pipe fittings has been reduced to meet federal requirements. Building house or house traps are now prohibited. And the requirement for prime PVC joints in non-pressurized DWP applications has been removed. And then the last item for plumbing is trap seal protection. It actually allows 4 different methods now, rather than just a trap primer. It actually allows a barrier type protection. That's it on that.
Any questions on the plumbing code?
In the fuel gas, we're including the bonding requirements that's previously in for New York State. We're also including the CSST conductive jacketed TST product that was passed by the Code Council, which isn't included, but we are going to include that as part of this update. Then I talked about the dryer exhaust, which actually is for fuel-fired dryers as well, that they can increase the length to 35 feet now. Code requires special ventilation in any space with an unvented infrared heater. And then with the update with the energy code as far as the re-air changes in the actual blower door test, the code now makes it clear that makeup air must be provided with any appliance in question, fuel-fired appliance. And then condensate pumps located in attics, all spaces that are inaccessible or not or in uninhabitable spaces must have control to shut down appliances. That's pretty much it. Fuel gas.
Any questions on the fuel gas code? Thank you, John.
Next, we'll hear about the fire code and existing building code from Dan Nichols.
Good morning. Dan Nichols, Farmer State staff. We're going to report on the fire code update. Since our 2006 currently based fire code of New York State, there are over 400 code changes that will be found in the draft edition that's in front of you. We clearly will not cover all of those today. But just to quickly cover what we're going to maintain, luckily through the previous International Code Council code development processes participated by the Department of State and many others in this room, including the Office of Fire Prevention and Control, we've been able to minimize the number of New York State modifications due to national adoption of previous New York State amendments. The amendments that we're going to retain and still continue to look at in the International Code development process is we are maintaining a requirement for automatic fire detection in non-sprinkler assembly occupancies, maintain our current fire apparatus access road, fire apparatus access for one-to-family unsprinkler dwellings, and fire department water supply requirements in rural areas as New York State modifications. We'll also be maintaining our existing means of egress, basically our fire inspection requirements for existing means of egress in existing buildings, tank abandonment requirements as promulgated by the Department of Environmental Conservation, as well as the sparkling devices, residential carbon monoxide alarm, requirements that you've already promulgated, the one you did today, the carbon monoxide requirements for commercial buildings. And the one that you gave us direction on last time, which is the suspension of continuing the amendment to require fire suppression systems at gas stations, with the proviso of keeping the existing requirement to maintain reports of appropriate rubber standards. The additions to the fire code that you'll see, as I said, are pretty substantive, but some of the topics that may be of interest to you is the now fully modified section on crowd management and public preparedness requirements. These came out of a collaborative effort from the National Institute of Standards and Technology reporting the World Trade Center, as well as working with the ICC terrorism buildings and other stakeholders, including the fire safety directors of New York, on crowd management, lockdown plans for schools, and expanded requirements for college and university fire and evacuation. There'll be a change to the sprinkler requirements, which will be less restrictive than are currently found in the current fire and building code of New York State, raising specific assembly occupancies from 100 to 300 persons as an occupant load threshold, and raising the sprinkler threshold based on feet, regardless of occupancy type, from 30 back to 55 feet, as recognized in the international codes. Many topics that are currently not regulated under the Uniform Code will now be covered, including the installation of solar voltaic electrical panels and rooftops, which is currently not covered by the Uniform Code. Carbon dioxide detection, not to be confused with carbon monoxide detection. Carbon dioxide detection is becoming a requirement now of the Uniform or the international codes, and will be proposed in the Uniform Code due to several deaths in vending scenarios due to liquid carbon dioxide leaks in basements of restaurants and single occupancies. There's now a requirement for fire service elevators that are designed to be used by fire department personnel in buildings over 120 feet in height. And this is similar to the occupant evacuation elevators that were discussed by Mark before. There will now be a better coordination regarding healthcare occupancies and other health-related occupancies such as senior housing, assisted living facilities as regulated by the New York State Department of Health, and hospitals. And will now also coordinate more specifically with the Life Safety Code, which is used for the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services and their accreditation of healthcare facilities.
I think
Finally,
they're only doing
one of the substantial changes I want to bring to your attention is the requirement for certain buildings to now have fire department emergency service responder radio repeater information and equipment within the building. This would allow for buildings such as this building that has a hard time adapting to the existing radio system for emergency responders to now have repeater systems in, which will also be connected with broadband, statewide broadband system. That's what I have for the fire code. Any more specific questions?
Any questions on the fire code?
For the international existing building code, the existing building code, for those code council members that have recently joined us, the existing building code was, New York State was a big part of the initial adoption of this document into the International Code Council process. Has become a great tool for us here in New York State for rehabilitating our existing building stock. The existing building code will continue to maintain the three major compliance methods. It's really a choice of three different methods that you can choose to rehab a code, and that's being maintained as the cornerstone of the document in the 2014 adoption. We also have to look at, since we are looking at existing buildings and a very diverse stock, we are maintaining the multiple residence law, single exit building requirements that currently exist in the existing building code, which were developed by committees previously promulgated by this group. We are also maintaining the work of the historic buildings chapter. We have a very, there's a separate chapter to deal with historic buildings that was worked on at great length by several folks in this room, by a committee that was put together by your group, the Office of Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation. That is not going to show up as an amendment in your package because because those were almost wholly adopted by the International Existing Building Code Development Committee, so they'll be used nationwide now. Some quick additions that you'll find in your next edition of the existing building code will be that fire alarm systems, automatic fire detection systems that are now required to be installed anywhere where the existing building code will otherwise give a waiver or an allowance not to provide a fire sprinkler system. Many times in the existing building code, where a fire sprinkler system will be required to be installed, if the building is required to have a municipal water system or a fire pump installed, code allows the sprinkler system not to be installed due to cost measures. However, now you have to provide at least a fire detection system to alert occupants of early notification of fire and to also alert the fire department of the situation within the building. Accessibility will now be more flexible between the three different types of compliance methods found in the existing building code. Currently, there is a discrepancy, and that is being fixed. Again, folks from New York State have been very instrumental in this chapter, and we're happy that, at least I'm happy that we'll be able to now have consistency throughout the method when it comes to accessibility. A new chapter on re-roofing, and from a structural design standpoint, there's always been trepidation in the existing building code regarding seismic design, how you deal with seismic design in the existing building stock. So there's been additional flexibility brought into that, basically increasing the allowance of live and lateral loads before something has to be done considering existing building code.
Questions on the IEBC? Thank you, Dan. Mark, anything else that we need to discuss before we move on?
So that concludes the Home Code Energy Code reports.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone who made presentations today. I think that this should identify or illustrate to the council the tremendous amount of work that has been going into the development of these rulemaking documents, some of the complexities of the technical requirements. We have a couple of issues that we are going to do some research on, but we're very pleased and excited to be in the final stages of completing the rulemaking documents, and as soon as we have more information to share with you regarding public comment, we'll make sure to do it. Thank you. Next agenda item, more restrictive standards petition report.
Yes, in the past, generally in the past, when we receive a petition to the Code Council from a local governments on more restrictive local standard, we usually try to get it to the Code Council at the next meeting of the Code Council. If not that one, it would be the meeting following that. Because we've been very busy working on the Uniform Code update being such a top priority, we've received several petitions for the last year and a half that we have not yet been able to bring forward to the Code Council. And today we're going to have a brief summary given by Nick McAndrew of our staff to give a quick summary of the petitions that we have received from local governments on more restrictive local standards.
Good morning. As Mark mentioned, we have several requests for more restricted local standards that we're in the process of reviewing. Number one, the town of Southfield is petitioning for a standard in connection with temporary tents. Section 2403.5 of the Fire Code allows temporary tents to be erected for a period of not more than 180 days within a 12-month period. The town amended its code to require applicants. The town amended its code to require applicants to remove the tent permit 30 days after initial inspection as determined to do with compliance with the code, and each 30 days thereafter, up to a maximum of 180 days. Number two, the town of Brookhaven is petitioning for a more restricted local standard for carbon monoxide detectors. Local law number 7 requires carbon monoxide detectors in all units and buildings used for human occupation. This includes all non-residential occupancies. Exempt buildings include those that do not utilize fossil fuel for equipment, have vehicles or equipment powered by fossil fuel stored or located within the building, or do not have attached parking garages. town also modified section 610 of the fire code, requiring all new and existing dwellings to have at least one carbon monoxide alarm or detector with a digital display indicating the amount of carbon monoxide. The minimum reportable level shall be 30 parts per million. However,
Can you speak a little into the mic?
yes, the minimum reportable level shall be 30 parts per million. However, the alarm shall sound at 50 parts per million. Nassau County is requiring carbon monoxide detectors in all new and existing commercial buildings. There do not appear to be any conditions that would allow a facility to be exempt from these requirements. The town of Sullivan shall require 5/8 inch type X gypsum wallboard on the underside of all stairways of newly constructed one-family dwellings, multiple family dwellings, and seasonal dwellings. The law shall provide occupants with additional time to evacuate a dwelling in the event of a structure fire. Stairs with open risers or spiral stairs are excluded from the requirement. The Village of Middleburg passed a local law modifying section 302.4 of the Property Maintenance Code. The law appears to have included provisions for the maintenance and removal of brush and briars. The law also gives the right of entry to the CEO for the purpose of inspection, removing, and destroying all tall grass, weeds, and brush prohibited under the law. The Town of Malta passed a local law that reduced the threshold for when an approved automatic sprinkler system is required in new buildings containing a group A, B, F, and or F occupancy. The New York City Department of Buildings enacted a local law adopting the 2014 supplement to the New York State Energy Conservation Construction Code with local amendments unique to construction within the city. Division is hoping to have several of these completed by next meeting for the council to act on. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, if there are no questions regarding more restrictive local standards, as Nick mentioned, a number of communities have been active adopting more restrictive standards. We'll be addressing those as soon as we can in 2016, understanding that we continue to place the Uniform Code and Energy Code updates as our highest priority. However, we do need to address these. Agenda item number 7, public comment period. There have been no individuals requesting public comment, so we will move to future meetings.
We developed a schedule for the Code Council meeting in 2016. This was sent out to the members of the Code Council a few weeks ago. They are March 9th, June 2nd, 25th, and November 17th. So after today, the next scheduled meeting of the Code Council would be on March 9th.
Any questions regarding the schedule? Okay. Agenda item number 9, other business. Is there other business to come before the council today? Mr. Torpey.
Mr. Chairman and fellow council members, I was appointed the labor representative for this council in 1994 by Governor Mario Cuomo. I have served on this committee for 21 years. Having retired from my day job 5 years ago as president of the Stevenage Union 638, I've talked to Ron and have decided that it's time for me to move on. So today will be my last meeting. I'm very happy to have served over the years. Some contentious issues on pipe and fire sprinklers and a lot of different things. So, John, I'm going to leave you as the last old timer here. You're fixing a lot of good members. I congratulate you folks and wish you all the best of luck and bid you a fond farewell. Thank you.
Jack, on behalf of the Department of State and the State Fire Prevention and Building Code Council, I would like to thank you for your tremendous service to this council. You have been a fantastic representative for 18, but also a great participant in our discussions, our debates, always presenting your views clearly and professionally. And I can think of no better way to serve the citizens of your jurisdiction. So, Mac, thank you very much. We know that I share the same with all the members of the council. Wish you a long and happy retirement from this board, and hope you'll join us on the webcast, I'm sure, from your boat in Florida or wherever you are. So, Jack, congratulations. Thank you very much. Any other items? Mark?
Yes, this meeting is as other meetings in the past. There's continuing education credits available for those that need that. And with that being said, I just want to make sure, see if there's anybody in New York City or the Buffalo locations that are signing up for continuing education credits.
No, not.
Nope.
Okay, and also for those in Albany, if there is anybody here that's seeking continuing education credits, you need to sign up for that at the table to my right.
Okay. Any other items? Mr. DeRusher.
Just as a question, because I have not been part of this process before, Mark's indicated the schedule for meetings. What happens from this point forward with the documents and public hearings, if that could be just general thought process of what's going to happen, not necessarily specific dates, but generally what's the process that's going to be going through here, and when will things be coming back to us?
Regarding the energy code and the uniform code?
Yes, correct.
Okay, good question. We're hoping that we will be able to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking for the energy code update and the uniform code update within the next month. And if we are able to do that, then that would begin a public comment period for both of those rules that is required to extend at least 45 days before, 60 days before public hearings can be conducted. We would then conduct public hearings on both rulemakings, and after which the rulemaking period or the comment period extends a minimum of 5 days. Once the comment period closes, then the Department of State staff will develop an assessment of all of the comments that have been received and provide that assessment to the council. We're hoping that we'll be able to complete the public comment period and provide an assessment to the council in the first quarter of 2016 that would set up a meeting of the council to review the assessment, and then for the council to determine if the assessment and comments that have been received compel the council to make changes to either of the rules. And depending upon what the council's disposition on those comments is, if there are substantive changes that are required to be made to the rules, then we would have to go through a revised rulemaking. If there are not substantive changes, then the council would have to determine if it wants to adopt the rules or not. So that sets up probably, that's about as much information as we can provide based upon the fact that we're not sure when we'll receive some of these, the ability to go into the public comment period, but we're hoping by the end of the first quarter 2016 we'll have the rules back to you for discussion and hopefully some final direction. And if the rules are adopted, let's say hypothetically by the council at the end of the first quarter, then we have two rules that will go into the energy code rulemaking. Does not have what we have referred to in the past as a transition. Essentially, the code council would have to establish an effective date for the energy code, the new energy code. With respect to the uniform code, there is a minimum period that the council has to wait until it can establish an effective date. However, the council does have an option to allow regulated parties to comply with either the current rule or the newly adopted rule during that period of time. Again, we refer to it as a transition period. And if everything stays in place in terms of our, the schedule as we see it, we would be establishing a final effective date for both the energy code and the uniform code at the end of the second quarter.
Second quarter.
Yes, it does, thank you.
Any other questions on the schedule? All right, before we adjourn, this is again our last meeting for 2015. As we've discussed in part today, we've gone through a significant amount of work as we continue to prepare for updating the energy code and the uniform code. This has been a tremendous burden on not only the department staff, but you to review and discuss and prepare for these two significant updates. And we appreciate the amount of work that you have put into this. We appreciate all of your comments and especially your perspective representing your discipline. So on behalf of the Department of State, thank you for your service to the Code Council and to the citizens of the state of New York. We look forward to continuing these updates over the course of the next year, and look forward to working with you as well. So thank you very much. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Do we have a motion? Mr. DeRouche, or is there a second? Second by Mr. Flanagan. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.